At my sister Ashley's wedding, under crystal chandeliers and imported roses. My father didn't give a blessing. He gave a sentence. In front of real estate tycoons, investors, and the family who had erased me. He smiled and declared, $150 million from the merger. And Lena, you are getting nothing. The room erupted with laughter. Ashley smirked, adjusting her veil. And my mother turned her eyes away. I should have crumbled. Instead, I lifted my champagne glass. My hands steady. My voice calm. I didn't drink to their health. I drank to their end. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The wedding toast wasn't the first time he'd erased me. That habit started decades ago, in the mahogany-paneled study of our estate. A room that smelled of expensive scotch and dismissal. Growing up in the shadow of the Grandview Empire meant understanding your function. My sister, Ashley, was the ornament. She was groomed for galas, beauty pageants, and PR photos, the shining, smiling face of the brand. I was the utility. I was the one who fixed the Wi-Fi, organized the files, and understood how the money actually moved. While Ashley was learning how to walk in heels, I was in the basement server room, teaching myself Python and SQL. By 22, I had built something revolutionary. I called it the concierge key. It was a digital ecosystem that could track guest preferences, predict inventory needs, and streamline staffing in real time. It wasn't just an app. It was a central nervous system for the entire hotel chain. I remember the day I brought it to my father. I had printed the schematics on heavy bond paper, binding them in a leather folder that looked exactly like the ones he used for his acquisitions. I walked into his office, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I laid it out on his desk, the code, the projections, the efficiency models. I waited for him to see me. I waited for him to realize that the daughter he ignored had just handed him the future of his company. Robert flipped through 2 pages. He didn't look at the data. He looked at the formatting. Then he closed the folder and slid it back across the desk like it was a dirty napkin. It's tidy, Lena, he said, his voice flat. But this is secretarial work. Back-end clutter. It's infrastructure, I argued, my voice trembling. It connects everything. He laughed. A dry, sharp sound. Real business isn't done with keyboards, sweetheart. It's done with handshakes. It's done with charisma. That's why we have Ashley. You're good at the invisible stuff. Keep the lights on. Let the men handle the empire. There it was. The glass wall. He didn't just dismiss my work, he gendered my ambition, reducing my architectural mind to administrative support. In his world, technology was for the help, power was for the patriarchs. I should have walked out then. I should have burned the code and left. But I didn't. For years, I stayed. I kept building, kept refining, kept trying to prove my worth through sheer volume of utility. I fell into the trap of normalizing cruelty. It's a survival mechanism. Really. When the people who are supposed to love you treat you like an employee they can't fire, your brain creates a cognitive dissonance to protect you. You tell yourself it's just tough love. You convince yourself that if you just optimize yourself enough, if you become useful enough, the affection will follow. You mistake exploitation for an apprenticeship. I didn't know then that he wasn't training me to lead. He was training me to serve. I took the folder back to the basement. I didn't delete the code. I just stopped putting his name on it. If he wanted me to be invisible, fine. I would become the ghost he never saw coming. The catalyst came 2 years later in a boardroom that smelled of lemon polish and old money. I hadn't stopped working. I had audited the entire Grandview network and found a vulnerability so massive it could compromise guest data across 3 continents. I didn't send an email. I walked into the quarterly meeting, interrupted my father's monologue about synergy, and put the report on the table. The legacy system is a sieve, I said, my voice steady. One breach, and the stock price halves. We need to patch it now. Robert didn't look at the report. He looked at the board members, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He didn't see a crisis averted. He saw a daughter stepping out of line. He saw a secretary speaking when she wasn't spoken to. "You are done," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will not have my authority questioned by a glorified IT girl. Pack your things. Lena, you are fired. And don't expect a reference." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I stood up, took my badge off my lanyard, and placed it gently on the mahogany table. I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and walked out into the humid Florida heat with nothing but a cardboard box containing a cactus and a hard drive. I had $92 in my checking account and a severance package of 0. I moved to Austin 3 days later. I found a studio apartment that was essentially a closet with a window. But it had fiber optic internet and cheap rent. I didn't sleep for the first month. I coded. I took the concierge key concept and stripped it down, rebuilt it, and fortified it. I created a middleware infrastructure that could bridge the gap between archaic hotel systems and modern demands. I called the company Sterling Systems. The CEO was listed as V. Sterling. I chose a gender-neutral identity on purpose. In my father's world, men built empires and women decorated them. V. Sterling could be anyone. He was a phantom, a titan, a genius. He was everything my father respected because he didn't know he was the daughter he had exiled. That year in Austin was the hardest of my life. But it was also the most clarifying. I realized something profound during those long nights when the only light came from my monitors. There is a specific kind of freedom in being the architect in the shadows. My family was obsessed with the facade. They spent millions painting the walls, gilding the ceilings, and polishing the brass, because that is what the guests saw. That is what the cameras captured. But I was pouring the concrete foundation in the dark. I was welding the steel beams that held the roof up. It is a lonely work. Invisible work. You don't get applause for a foundation that holds. You only get blamed when it cracks. But I realized that while the paint can peel and the gold can flake, the foundation dictates whether the house stands or falls. My suffering wasn't a punishment. It was the construction cost of becoming unbreakable. I wasn't just surviving their rejection. I was engineering a reality where they could not exist without me. 6 months after I launched, the purchase orders started coming in. First, from boutique chains, then from major conglomerates, and finally, the big one, a licensing request from the Grandview Hotel Group. They were desperate. Their system was failing. Just as I predicted. They needed a patch. And Sterling Systems was the only vendor with the solution. I signed the contract as V. Sterling. I charged them triple the market rate. And they paid it. They wired the money to a ghost, never suspecting that the code saving their empire was written by the hands they had thrown away. While I was building Sterling Systems into a fortress, the Grandview empire was rotting from the inside out. My father had semi-retired to his golf handicap, leaving the day-to-day operations to the dream team Ashley, the face, and Brandon, the CFO and fiancé. They treated the CEO title like a fashion accessory. They loved the power, the press releases, and the ribbon cuttings. But they loathed the governance. My software, now fully integrated into their servers, gave me a front row seat to their incompetence. It started as a low-level alert on my dashboard, a discrepancy in the operational expense algorithm. The system flagged a massive spike in capital improvements at the flagship Miami property. According to the logs, they were renovating the entire north wing. But when I cross-referenced the occupancy data, another feature of my code, the north wing, was fully booked. You can't replace marble floors while guests are sleeping in the beds. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my father. I initiated a forensic audit. I traced the vendor codes for the construction companies billing the Grandview. They didn't exist. They were shell entities registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. And the signatory Brandon. He wasn't just bad at math, he was embezzling. He was funneling millions out of the company to fund a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. He was hollow. A suit filled with greed and hair gel. But that wasn't the knife in the heart. The knife was Ashley. I wanted to believe she was the victim. I wanted to believe she was the naive golden child being played by a con man. So I dug deeper. I accessed the internal email server, a privilege I had as the admin of my own software. I found a thread titled, Cash Flow Issue, Wedding Budget. Brandon had laid it out for her. He told her the company was bleeding. He told her they couldn't afford the imported peonies, the private jet charters, or the 3-day reception. He admitted he was moving money around to cover the gaps. Ashley's response wasn't shock. It wasn't outrage. It was complicity. Fix it, she wrote. I don't care which account you pull it from. Dad can't know. And the deposits are due Friday. Make it happen. Brandon. I am not canceling the fireworks. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. That was the moment the last tether snapped. I had spent my life thinking Ashley was protected because she was soft. Because she was loved. But she wasn't soft. She was rot. She was willing to cannibalize the legacy our father built. The legacy I was exiled for trying to protect. Just to maintain the optics of her perfect life. She wasn't a sister, she was an accomplice. By late September, the Grandview was technically insolvent. They were weeks away from payroll bouncing. They were desperate. They needed a miracle. So I gave them one. I had my lawyers draft a buyout offer from Sterling Systems. $150 million. It was enough to cover the debts, hide Brandon's theft, and pay for the wedding of the century. To them, the Sterling was a savior. A mysterious tech billionaire swooping in to merge old luxury with new tech. They didn't read the fine print on the asset transfer. They just saw the zeros. They signed the deal on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, I received the invitation to the wedding. It was heavy cardstock. Cream with gold embossing. My seat assignment was table 19. The table by the kitchen doors. The table for distant cousins and obligated staff. They invited me, not because they missed me, but because they wanted an audience. They wanted me to see them win. I RSVP'd, yes. The wedding invitation sat on my dashboard like a summons. Table 19. The overflow table near the kitchen service doors. Reserved for distant cousins and staff, they felt obligated to feed. It was a petty, calculated insult designed to remind me of my place in the back. Out of sight. Lucky to be in the room. But before I walked into the lion's den, I had to visit the only other person my family had erased. Grandma Eleanor lived in the penthouse suite of the Palms, a luxury assisted living facility that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. The family visited her twice a year, Christmas and her birthday. They brought flowers, spoke to her in that condescending, slow voice, people reserve for toddlers and the elderly, and checked her pulse to see how much longer they'd have to wait for the inheritance. They thought she was senile. They thought she was a relic. I knew she was the shark who taught my father how to swim. I walked into her room. She was sitting by the window, staring at the ocean. A untouched cup of herbal tea cooling on the table. "You can drop the act, Grandma," I said, closing the door and locking it. "It's just me." Eleanor turned. The vacant, cloudy look vanished instantly, replaced by eyes that were sharp, clear, and amused. She straightened her spine, shedding 20 years of frailty in a second. "Took you long enough," she clipped. "I was beginning to think you'd actually let them sell my hotel." "I bought it," I said, sitting opposite her. "Or M.V. Sterling did." She laughed. A dry, rasping sound that sounded like counting cash. M.V. Sterling. A bit melodramatic. "Isn't it, but effective? Robert always did have a blind spot for things he couldn't control." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, strictly forbidden in the facility, and lit one with a gold lighter. "You knew," I said. "It wasn't a question. I know everything. Lena. I built the Grandview. Your father just manages the debt. I watched him fire you. I watched him exile the only person in that family with a brain. And I watched you build your little empire in Austin." She took a drag, exhaling a plume of blue smoke. "Who do you think authorized the seed funding for Sterling Systems?" The air left the room. "The Atlas Trust." I stammered. "That was a blind angel investor out of Zurich." "That was me," Eleanor said, tapping ash into a saucer. "I moved some assets around. I couldn't give it to you directly. Your father would have tied it up in probate court. I had to let you starve a little. Lena, hunger makes better architects than comfort does." She had been the silent partner all along. While my parents were dismissing me, she was betting on me. "Why?" I asked. "Because you remind me of myself, before I let men take credit for my work," she said, her voice hardening. "And I am tired of watching your father parade around my kingdom like he conquered it. He didn't conquer it. He borrowed it. And he defaulted a long time ago." She reached under the cushion of her chair and pulled out a thick, yellowed envelope. She slid it across the table. "This is the original loan agreement, from 1985, she explained. "When Robert wanted to expand into Miami, he didn't have the capital. I lent it to him. He never paid it back. According to Clause 14b, in the event of default, the voting rights for his shares revert to the lender." She pulled a fountain pen from her pocket and signed the bottom of the document with a flourish. "I am transferring my proxy to you. Lena. He doesn't own the company. He barely owns his own suit. Take it back. It was never his." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, like a weapon. "One piece of advice," Eleanor said, turning back to the window as she heard the nurses approaching in the hallway. "Don't just win. Make sure they know they lost." The laughter in the ballroom didn't sting anymore. It sounded like static. It was the sound of a machine that had already broken down, but hadn't realized it yet. My father stood on the stage, chest puffed out, basking in the applause of the senators and investors he had invited to witness his triumph. He raised his glass to me one last time. A mock salute to the daughter he had just publicly disinherited. I didn't blink. I pulled my phone from my clutch. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need to storm the stage. I owned the building's digital infrastructure. I had built the concierge key system that controlled the lights, the locks, and the audiovisual network. With 2 taps of my thumb, I overrode the DJ's playlist. With a 3rd tap, I hijacked the main projector screen behind the head table, the massive 4K display that was currently showing a slideshow of Ashley and Brandon's engagement photos. The music cut out instantly. The room went dead silent. The photo of Ashley and Brandon vanished, replaced by a high-resolution PDF. It was the deed of sale for the Grandview Hotel Group. I accept your congratulations, Dad, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The acoustics in the room were perfect. And in the sudden silence, my voice carried like a bell. Robert frowned, squinting at the screen behind him. What is this? Technical difficulties? No, I said, standing up. It's a receipt. You just announced that you sold the company to Sterling Systems for $150 million. You told this room that M.V. Sterling is the future. You were right. I walked toward the center of the room. The crowd parted for me, confused, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. But you got one detail wrong. M.V. Sterling isn't a he, and he isn't a stranger. I tapped my phone again. The screen refreshed. It showed the incorporation papers for Sterling Systems. The redacted owner's name faded away, replaced by the original text, Lena Vance. I bought you out. Dad, I am M.V. Sterling. Robert's face went the color of ash. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. That's impossible. You're a secretary. You're nothing. I'm the architect. I corrected. I built the system you're standing in, and I just foreclosed on your ego. Ashley stood up, her veil trembling. Lena, stop it. You're ruining my wedding. Your wedding. I laughed. A cold, sharp sound. Let's talk about your wedding. Ashley, let's talk about how you paid for it. I swiped left on my screen. The projector cycled to a new document. A spreadsheet. It was a forensic accounting log of the Capital Improvements Fund. Brandon, I said, turning to the groom. He looked like he was about to vomit. Would you like to explain to these nice investors why you billed the company $3.5 million for marble flooring that was never delivered? The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of air being sucked out of the room. That's a lie, Brandon shrieked, jumping up. She's hacking the system. It's a glitch. It's not a glitch, I said. It's a paper trail. And just so we're clear on who knew what, I swiped again. The email thread. The one titled Wedding Budget, Fix It. The screen displayed Ashley's words in 10-foot-tall letters. I don't care which account you pull it from. Dad can't know. Make it happen. Brandon. Ashley froze. She looked at the screen. Then at the horrified faces of the senators and business partners. And finally at our father. The golden child facade cracked, revealing the rot underneath. You knew, Robert whispered, staring at his favorite daughter. You stole from me. She didn't just steal from you. Dad, I said. She cannibalized the legacy you were so desperate to keep away from me. I put my phone back in my clutch. I already sent this packet to the district attorney. They were very interested in the wire fraud charges. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the ballroom opened. They didn't slam, they opened with the heavy, inevitable weight of authority. 4 officers entered, followed by a detective in a cheap suit. They didn't look at the flowers. They didn't look at the cake. They walked straight toward the head table. Brandon tried to run. He actually scrambled over his chair, knocking over the champagne tower. The crash of breaking glass was the only sound in the room until the detective grabbed him by the lapels of his custom tuxedo. "Brandon Hayes," the detective said, snapping the cuffs on. "You have the right to remain silent." Ashley screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound. The sound of a fantasy dying. Robert collapsed into his chair. A king without a crown, watching his empire burn down in the middle of a toast. I turned and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see them fall. I had already engineered the demolition. Gravity would do the rest. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. Brandon was denied bail, citing flight risk. The district attorney's office called it one of the cleanest cases of corporate embezzlement they had ever seen. Mostly because I had gift-wrapped the evidence for them. He is currently trading his bespoke suits for an orange jumpsuit, facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Ashley wasn't arrested, but she was ruined. The wedding was canceled. Obviously, the socialite friends who had fought for invitations suddenly deleted her number. She lost her trust fund, her reputation, and her husband in a single night. She moved into a small apartment in Tampa, and the last I heard, she was selling her designer handbags online to pay rent. She reached out to me once, sending a long, tearful email about sisterhood and forgiveness. I didn't reply. I sent it to the spam folder, right where it belonged. And Robert, my father, was removed as CEO by a unanimous vote of the board the following morning. I sat at the head of the table for that meeting. He wasn't even allowed in the building. He had to dial in via conference call. When the vote was read, he didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just hung up. The silence on the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I spent the next 6 months purging the company. I fired the sycophants and the yes-men who had enabled Brandon's theft. I stripped the Grandview name off every building. I rebranded the entire chain as the Eleanor Collective, a tribute to the woman who actually built it. Grandma Eleanor moved out of the Palms and into the penthouse suite of the flagship hotel. She spends her days smoking on the balcony and terrorizing the kitchen staff with her demands for perfect tea. She is happier than I have ever seen her. As for me, I am standing on that same penthouse balcony now. The view is incredible. I can see the ocean, the city, and the horizon stretching out forever. When I was a child, my father told me I wasn't allowed up here because I might mess something up. He told me the view was for the people who mattered. I leaned against the railing, watching the sun dip below the water. I realized something about revenge. People think it's about taking something away from someone else. But true justice isn't theft. It's a harvest. I didn't steal this company. I didn't steal this life. I planted the seeds in the dark, in that cramped server room in Austin, and I watered them with sweat and discipline while my family slept. This isn't a hostile takeover. It is just the natural order of things. The one who tends the garden gets to eat the fruit. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the salt air. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the secretary. I was the owner. And for the first time in my life, the silence around me wasn't empty. It was peaceful. If you have ever built something in the dark, while others took the credit in the light, tell me your story below. This is for the architects of the invisible.